So welcome everybody, and this is I'm going to call to order at 6:42 the Lenox School Committee meeting of January 4th, 2021. And I just want to remind people that we're using a different format now, so there'll be no chat room. If you wish to speak, you'll need to, I believe you still have a raise the hand option. I can't see all this stuff myself. And I'm hoping somebody will help me through this because it's hard to run the meeting and do all that, but not everybody has the ability to make all this happen. So we've had a number of, the school committee has received a number of communications over the last, either Dr. Cameron has received or the school committee's received or I've received a number of communications over the last several weeks, particularly the last week. We've received a, just going to go through because I've got many of these here. We had a concern from Tabitha Pickett-Valley about with COVID-19 raging on that she hoped that we might reconsider our reopening on the 19th. We had, I figure out where I put all these.
Bob, I've got them in date order, if that helps.
Okay, well, we have a letter from Kristen Moriarty about reopening. We have a letter from Alexa Bermudez. We had a letter from Ollie Welch that Dr. Cameron had received. We had a letter from Alexis and Christopher Kennedy. We had a letter from Elizabeth Jarprue Fowler. We had a letter from Jennifer O'Brien. Some of these went to the task force. Some of them went to the full committee. We had a letter from Ashley Sherburn. We had a letter from Christopher Fenton and or maybe Karen Fenton. So those were letters we received, with a lot of concerns, largely about the possible changes in K1 and 2 to full-time instruction, and largely relating to the fact that people might need to change teachers. So,
Hey, Bob.
Yeah.
We also had received something from Aviva Wishler.
Okay.
And did you say Jennifer Brinton?
Those had come. I thought those had come before the last meeting.
They may have. I mean, I was not at the last meeting, so I need to. That was December 24th.
Okay, well, then they were here for this one then.
Just to get them on the record, you may have mentioned Kristen Moriarty and then Lisa Barta.
Yeah, I did not mention her, but yeah, those were ones that were further
back.
back.
That was in December 11th. Just to
Yeah,
get them on record.
Yeah, thank you.
You're welcome.
So we have received quite a bit of correspondence, and when we get to the appropriate time in the meeting, if people would like to speak, is there anybody who'd like to speak right now and as part of public comment? Raise your hand and maybe I'll see it, maybe I won't. I don't see any hands raised right now, so I'm going to proceed with the rest of the meeting. And when we get to the appropriate point, if somebody wishes to speak, please raise your hand. We have a couple of important issues to discuss tonight. So our first order of business will be the school committee meeting minutes of December 7th.
I will move to approve the school committee meeting minutes of December 7th.
I'll second the motion.
Any discussion, edits, concerns? Hearing none, call for a roll call vote. Molly?
Molly Elliott, aye.
Christine,
Christine Morrow, aye.
Francie? Okay, you'll need to unmute yourself when the time comes again, Francie. David?
I abstain. I was absent.
Yep. Bob?
Bob Munch, aye.
Myself, I. And I don't know if we have Anne Marie here yet. Can somebody see if Anne Marie's? No, I don't see Anne Marie here yet. Okay,
Don't forget to go back to Francie.
Francie Sorrentino, aye.
okay, and maybe Francie, you could turn your microphone down a little bit because it comes on very strong.
I'll get a kid.
Okay, thanks. Update on the
Have
superintendent.
you turn this to Mikey?
The superintendent search committee has 8 interviews starting tomorrow night, 2 tomorrow, 2 on Wednesday, 2 next Monday, and 2 next Wednesday. At which point we hope to narrow things down to 3 or 4 candidates for the full committee to see. We have a search committee that includes 13 people, 3 school committee, 3 LEA or 3 teachers or personnel from the school department, 1 administrator, 3 parents, and 3 community members. So there are 13 of us. And we've, MASC continues to assist us in the process. Although, Bob and Anne Marie and Christine and I have been kind of doing the, Christine is taking Anne Marie's place for interviewing purposes, because Anne Marie's doing more shifts at the hospital right now, and that may be where she is tonight. So things are moving, and we hope that by the end of next week, we'll have a further direction to go, and we'll be scheduling some additional meetings as necessary for the final round interviews. So let's move on to the superintendent's report.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm here, even though I may not be visible to the audience or to the school committee. I wanted to make just announce something that's not on the agenda. It doesn't require any action by the school committee, but this came up this morning during the administrative team meeting. The administrative staff at Lenox Memorial Middle and High School wanted me to know that the PSAT, the preliminary scholastic aptitude test, is going to be administered on the 26th of January in school. And because of the size of that group who would be scheduled to take that test, in order to ensure that there is adequate spacing in the building, we would have over 70 students, I think, in the school, that on that day, LMHS, the rest of the group will be remote in instruction for that one day. It's not highly desirable, but that was deemed by the high school administration to be the safest way to administer the test, which has to be taken in person. So I just wanted to make the school committee aware of that, and we will take whatever steps are needed to notify the students and parents who would be affected by that. The next item on the first item actually that's on the agenda for my report has to do with deliberation on resumption of athletics. And this was discussed at length this morning, and I believe Mr. Kneibel, I'm not sure if Mr. Cogswell is here. I believe Mr. Pugh is here also to discuss this with the school committee. If need be, I'll comment at the end of their presentation. But if you don't mind, Mr. Chairman, I'd ask that Mr. Kneibel, Mr. Cogswell, if he's present, and Mr. Pugh be able to speak to the committee.
Hi, I believe I'm on.
Okay,
So I know this was brought forth, and I know we had a Tuesday evening coffee and conversation where about 35 parents attended, and we were, basically offering the help of our school adjustment counselor, with issues that kids might be having as we were heading into break through this remote period. But athletics did come up that night as well. And we had a couple parents that expressed their opinion to us to definitely reconsider if we could have any winter sports running. Which we advised them at that time that this meeting was open to the public. So I'm sure we have many parents in the audience tonight. As far as my guidance, I guess, for the committee is that I still see a problem in offering winter sports with my own conscience moving forward, knowing that the work we do during the daytime to have students resume school on the 19th of January in the hybrid fashion with 2 separate cohorts. Athletics would mix those cohorts. Having teachers as coaches could prove to end up being an interruption to other students' education in the hybrid model if we were to have contact tracing identify, the ski mountain or a Nordic event as a spreader of the virus. And then the overall transportation of our winter athletes, I just know that, it's either a hardship for some families that have altered their working hours due to our schedule in order to get their children to the mountain. And I really don't want to feel that anyone is left out from an event due to their own family dilemma. I do know as we resume school today that we heard from several families that are going through various hardships due to the virus and some students as well. I just don't want to see that number grow. And I think that, sports would be a great thing mentally and socially for our students, but I can't see it happening when we have a morning cohort and an afternoon cohort and we end up mixing them in the evening. So my vote is still to hold off on athletics. I know that Brian's here and Dave Pugh's here as well.
I think I would just kind of follow up, where Mike was talking, and I know, I sent something out to all the athletic directors in the county this morning to just kind of find out what was going on in other schools, and I do know there are a number of other schools that are kind of still waiting to kind of see what happens in the time after the winter vacation that we just finished out here, and kind of see where the numbers go before they make final decisions as far as anything that's moving forward. But as Mike mentioned, I know I personally would feel I would struggle kind of throwing everybody into those situations where we want everybody to be able to get together. We want everybody to be able to jump around and have fun. And, as the basketball coach here in the winter, I would love to have a group working out right now. But safety wise and thinking of the well-being of everybody, I think I'd follow along Mike's path right now.
And to follow Mike, and can you hear me?
Yeah, I hear you.
Yeah, so Dave Pugh here. To follow Mike and Brian, yeah, that's still my major concern is the safety. I'm still very hesitant. These activities, even outside, are very social events. I've been busy with the Berkshire County ADs making plans for the different seasons. As Brian said, there's a lot of wait and see right now across the county. School committees are meeting this week. Some districts are dependent as far as athletics on a percentage of COVID within their towns. So it's very much in flux across the county right now. I think this week, everybody in the next 2 weeks, everybody's kind of waiting to see how the holidays impact the amount of COVID cases across the county. So, as Brian said, we're kind of in a hold and see pattern, but I concur with Mike in regards to transportation. Our hybrid schedule is unique to us. It's working academically from what I see as math department chair as well. Our attendance is outstanding, but having different cohorts each day makes it very difficult to break them out and be sure they're broken out correctly in the evening. And those cohorts change because we have students reporting daily. Every other day, we have a new set of students who are staying home due to different things. So it'd be very, very difficult to manage who's in what cohort and when. So, the transportation issues, the safety issues, I concur with Mike and Brian as the ultimate responsibility people of our school building and our kids.
Okay, I just wanted to jump in here. I've been hopeful that we could resume athletics at some level sometime along, and I'm not sure how I'll vote tonight, but we had a fairly compelling meeting, Dr. Cameron and I, with a lot of the medical staff in the community, including the Dr. Doyle, who I guess is one of the leading people in the county on COVID. Doctors Blagg and Dr. Blagg and Dr. O'Coin, the infectious disease folks, Dr. Nelson, who's got students in school, the two school nurses, Molly Revest, who's a nurse down at CHP. And it was a pretty imposing medical group. And we talked about a lot of the issues. We also had Jim from Tri-Town Health, whose last name escapes me right now. Jim Willis. And it was a very compelling meeting because they talked about how Lee has remained, I realize Lee's model is different from ours, but Lee has remained open because when they look at the numbers, and our folks are looking at the numbers very closely too, but they're looking at where when for example, when Lenox had its outbreak a couple weeks ago, and it was largely Kimball Farms related, so the numbers went way up because of Kimball Farms. But there were, I think Jim Willis had mentioned there were maybe 9 other cases in Lenox, and they were restricted to 3 families. And he said when you actually break the numbers down and actually look at where it's happening, which of course they know and most of us don't, they realize that the school situation has not been a spreader. There's been no case in Berkshire County other than the private school in Williamstown at the very beginning, where COVID has been spread from a student to a student or faculty to a student. There've been some closures because of concerns of it, but there's been not a single case of it happening. So that said, I came away with a new respect at looking at the data very closely, very specifically as to where the outbreaks are, who's involved, and what the concerns, might be. So to that end, I was hoping that we would be able to possibly support the opening of the winter ski programs. But I recognize that our cohort situation will never allow for that, because if the mixing of cohorts will always prevent us from doing that. And I applaud, Mike and Brian and David, because it's ultimately the safety of our students that they're most concerned about. But I was hoping that we might be able to find some way that we could approve, winter athletics, but it may not happen. So.
Bob, I'd like to ask a question about this a little bit. And I can't tell if Mr. Pugh touched on it or not. I didn't fully follow this. I mean, to me, it seemed like there were two issues. There was the medical issue, that the spread, but also the cohort issue. I mean, you've just sort of addressed in a way the medical issue. But my other question is it, and I think Dave started to address this, and I just would like to firm this up. I mean, can we have half a pie instead of a whole pie? In other words, can we just recognize that that maybe one cohort participates, on X day, and the other cohort, that they leapfrog each other in their participation, so that at least we're getting some sort of participation, across the board with the kids. They're not getting it all, but maybe we're going to get some.
Well, I mean, I think to answer that, I think within public schools, what makes something that's remained steadfast within a public school, at least for me throughout my entire career, and I think, it's for everybody, is the whole idea of when you're providing a service as a school, it has to be equitable and it has to be attainable by all students in the school. I know the COVID crisis presents a unique issue, but if I'm ever doing something in the classroom, and this is something you learn as a young teacher, everything we do in that school needs to be equitable in nature and available to everyone. So when you reach a point within the discussion where it's not, for instance, our Washington, D.C. trip, that was a trip that we made equitable and available to every single 10th grader within the school. If we couldn't do that, we weren't going to offer the trip. As much as it would have been beneficial to half the grade, I strongly believe, since we serve the public in this capacity as a public school, that if we can't offer something equitable across the board to all students, then we really have to investigate. So our coaches are very amendable to offering athletics, but I think as the leaders in the school, we have to be very careful to make sure it's available to all of our students. And I think that's a premise, kind of a fulcrum for Dr. Cameron, Mike, Brian, and myself. It's been that way. That's been my fulcrum since March. And at times the decisions are very difficult.
So would that be the indoor versus the outdoor sports then? Is that?
One of the other things, the difficulty as far as the equity piece goes, is we do have a morning cohort and an afternoon cohort. So practices wouldn't be happening until 3 o'clock in the afternoon. So if you're in the morning cohort and go home, you might not have a ride. You might not have availability to be able to get back to school, to be able to participate in the afternoon as well. So I know that was one of the concerns that's come up at different times.
And with that said, then you're dependent, if we don't offer busing, then you're dependent on parents driving. I've heard very positive results about parents taking students to and from our Nordic Ski Club and Alpine. But the bottom line is, if it's a school sanctioned event and we have parents potentially taking mixed cohort students to the practice, as I said before, the events that are planned by the athletic directors and coaches are very well managed. It's the before and after that's extremely difficult. And that's where things fall apart. So as much as the event can be managed well, it's getting students there in an equitable and safe way, and it's getting students home in an equitable and safe way. That's where when it comes right down to it, that's where I have difficulties.
The other thing that comes to my mind is, if we have a championship athlete, and my heart breaks for those kids for, last spring, this fall, and this winter. But if you're a championship athlete and the athletic code, you're not going to skip that practice when the sore throat comes. And right now, I mean, we see it every day. We have kids that call in and say they're not coming to the hybrid class because they want to see if this is a cold that they're catching, or if it's something that's going to grow into a fever later on. And I'd hate to see students push themselves to attend, because I know our students. I mean, it's a great trait to have, but it would be very hard to bow out of a contest when they think that they might have a sore throat or a cough, or they really didn't check their temperature when they arrived there, because it's outside. I mean, we're looking at better ways to check student temperatures as they enter the building as the weather grew colder. These are things that we're putting on coaches that wasn't in their job description, and it's easy to do as a building and manage one facility, but they're off-site, and it really, it's a lot of responsibility to put in someone's hands, or when a racer goes down and needs assistance, who is responding? We have a much better contained day, which is giving success to schools being open to educate kids. It's the after school time that supervision becomes a lot lighter. We're talking 1 adult to 10 kids tops within our building. It changes when we run athletics.
Thanks all of you for that expanded explanation.
Anybody else want to talk about the athletics? We have a couple of people who've raised their hands. Jillian Hurst, I'm going to allow you to talk. First off, I'm just going to ask you if this is about the sports issue that you want to talk. You'll have. Okay. And Max DeGrigley, I'm going to give you a permission to talk.
Everyone, can you guys hear me?
Yeah, maybe a little louder.
Okay, yeah, no problem. So I just wanted to quickly just debunk the cohort problem. So from my point of view as a student, the cohort system is awesome to a certain level, but I think Mr. Munch touched on it last meeting that the cohort system is completely falling apart regardless of athletics or whatever after school, right? So you have people regardless mixing because their jobs require them to go to work, right? We have students who work and they're going to go to work, and there could happen to be a Lenox student at their work, and they may not have a last name that is in that cohort. And are we like shutting that down too? Are we preventing students from working? I mean, I guess that's really like my whole point, is that I don't think the cohort really argument should even be relevant, in the sense that I don't think that it's actually being held true right now and without athletics. So I don't understand why, if we do athletics, why that would even be part of the theory, because I just don't see how that's very viable. And then another thing to touch on, like what Mr. Knievel said about the championship athletes. I'm not sure if everybody on the committee saw, but Mass Live came out with a list of top 7 athletes for male and female for the skiing sports. So out of those 14 athletes from Western Mass, 6 of them are students at Lenox Memorial. So not only is like this decision affecting the people at Lenox Memorial, but you're also affecting pretty much the entire Western Mass skiing scene, in the sense that our students have a significant play on the competitiveness and the merit of the league. I think that it's got to be taken into consideration, based on the fact that realistically the Lenox athletes can change quite a bit when it comes to how the league is, and the way the league is, and how, in the end, that can have a lot to do with how someone is viewed as a possible college athlete. And I think that you're not only hurting Lenox students by not letting them play, but you're also hurting every single other student if we don't participate. And the final thing was about Lenox athletes being really not willing to comply with the temperature checks and you know, trying to get into play even when they're sick. And I would argue that I think that Lenox has raised up some of the most responsible people that I know, and those athletes care for our teammates to such an extent that I think we would never ever want to risk hurting another teammate based on your own selfish needs. And I think that comes right down from our coaches. Our coaches are very good, and they promote that team atmosphere. And I think that team atmosphere will absolutely make sure that everyone takes health, safety first. We are masked up, goggles down, gloves on at all times to make sure everyone's staying safe. So I think that Lenox students are just that responsible that they will absolutely be able to handle that. And that's a responsibility that every person has to have in 2020, 2021. Like in this age of COVID-19, we all have to have that responsibility. And there's no better place to show that off than for the Lenox students to do that via athletics. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. I appreciate it.
Okay, and I just wanted to note that Tim Wilson, in the question and answer, indicated that he felt that it was attainable to have the groups separated. Group A could compete on Monday, could have a Monday, Tuesday, for example, Monday, Tuesday, and Group B a Wednesday, Thursday, and keep the cohorts separate by having the coaches work with, one group of kids for a couple of days, another group for a couple of days.
Mr. Chairman,
Yep.
may I just address comments that were just made by Mr. DeGrigley?
Yep.
I agree with him that to this extent, the cohorts were not established as prophylactic measures. They were established in order to organize instruction so that we could accommodate having all students in school every day while we maintain 6-foot spacing in all activities. The issue with the cohorts has to do with equity in terms of access to the training that's involved in preparing for athletic meets. I think that MIAA, and I can't remember the state agency that MIAA has worked with. I think the point that Mr. Pugh was making, and he made it at the last meeting, is not that the events themselves are intrinsically dangerous in some sense. Basketball probably involves lots of close physical contact. I don't know that alpine skiing involves that kind of close physical contact during the events. But the issue has to do with what precedes and what follows the events. And there are two factors that I just would like to stress. The committee obviously will exercise its own judgment. One of them is that the morning cohort is disadvantaged to the extent that it can't participate as readily as the afternoon cohort in the training or the practices that are necessary for the team. We have students who are school choice. 40% of the kids in the district are school choice. If they're not going home, I don't know where they're going after the morning cohort, but they're not staying at school. And so there's an issue for kids in the morning cohort in participating in athletic events, especially practices. The other issue has to do with transportation. We have not, as I understand it, historically had buses transport students to, say, Bosque or wherever the events are taking place. That's left up to the students and their parents, I guess, to get them to those events. Now, if every student has a chauffeur-driven arrangement where somebody will take that student individually to the event, then the point I'm about to make is really not relevant. But if students need rides with other people, and we're enforcing distancing requirements on buses as safety measures, you would have to be driving a pretty large vehicle for these kids not being sitting in close proximity to one another for more than the time that's currently the CDC contends should be considered to be close contact. So it's not the events themselves that seem to me to be a problem. Again, to Mr. Pugh's point, it's what happens before and after them, and also what happens to half of the student body when their access to practice may be less readily available than those in the afternoon cohort. Thank you.
Anybody else wish to talk about sports?
Yeah, I'll just chime in a little bit. Thanks for clarifying the cohorts, Dr. Cameron. That was a question I had. So I didn't think they were set up for prophylactic use. So that it's good to know it was just geographic spacing. I think it's admirable that the staff wants to have the equity involved. I think that is what we should be doing as a school district. We should make things as fair as we can for everyone. In normal times, I would certainly be saying, yeah, we let's make it all equitable. The problem is we're not in normal times. Things are very different. I would turn the question a little bit and say, by denying children the opportunity to take part in the winter sports, we are guaranteeing that we are removing this outlet of theirs, physical and mental exercise outdoors. We take that away from them. What can we give them to add back in? Anything we add back in is a plus. Anything is better than nothing.
So
The risk factor, transportation, I think that we would be within our rights to say, you know what, you have to provide your own transportation. Yes, if you're in a morning cohort, you are disadvantaged. We're sorry if you can't get there, but maybe you can work something out. Maybe you can get there. What do we think these kids are doing now? They're going out and they're doing things. They're doing things unsupervised. They're doing things in private clubs. They're traveling to other counties. They're still trying to get their exercise in. They're still trying to do it, and there is no oversight. So I think it's an improvement, not a perfect solution by any means, but an improvement. I heard somebody trying to talk.
So to answer that question, Bob, there are community teams already going. We have about 40 kids already participating in a town team that will compete against other towns, I imagine, throughout New England. But and the same thing with downhill, and I believe that's what the question was earlier in December, is should they be out there recruiting for their own, local teams? Right now, I heard Bosque isn't even opening until later in January, maybe even February. They have no plan to open. And that's where downhill would go. But what I'm hearing is that there's a group of Lenox students that are at Otis Ridge training. So I do think there are ways, just like, Max mentioned, that our kids do work. We have kids that work in the grocery store where they're exposed to many, many different people. They have their own safety protocols, but it isn't someone's going to come back to Lenox and point the finger at Lenox and say, this would have been avoided if, the school thought differently. There is that independence of us not being, maybe having the finger pointed and saying we're elitist because we are not finding the ride for the family that might not have a car and their kid comes by bus. I mean, there are very few upperclassmen that take the bus to school, but we still have them. I still have to worry about transportation to that PSAT and home from the PSAT for the junior class, where most juniors won't even think twice about it because they will just borrow their car and be able to drive themselves to and from. So I mean, that's where the equity piece comes in for us. But I do know, that I did point everyone in the direction of the community center to get their buy-in and to find an umbrella to work under that wouldn't necessarily be Lenox Public Schools. Because I do feel it's very important not to send the mixed message.
Yeah, so then just to speak for the different clubs going on within our community, our coaches are, trying to work under the hospice of Bosque. Bosque is closed, so they're going to try to start up a club this coming Wednesday at Otis Ridge for a little while until Bosque is ready. Nordic's been having the club for a little while now through our break. Things are going, from what I report out from the coaches, seem to be going pretty smoothly. And it's under two different umbrellas. Bob, I completely understand where you're going. And that's exactly where the ADs that I work with in the county are at. They feel like they want to offer something instead of nothing. But I go back to, and I've been arguing this all along, and is just how can we provide equity? Other ADs are more confident than I am that they're providing equity, but they're doing so without busing. Their cohort situations are different. They're also they'll have a cohort, let's say they meet up for the whole day with a certain group of students. That group of students practices after school. So they're able to keep their kids separate. Some schools are full in person and they can mix kids up at the end of the day however they want because the kids are all in school together. We're unique. We have the cohort situation. So that kind of supersedes our ability to, as a school, offer even anything. And I agree with you. After our last school committee, Bob, I reached out to Amy Higgins and I said, what are some ways, if we're not going to have athletics? I completely agree with you. What are some things we can do to offer students and families to get outside and get active? Because I see it in my students when I meet with them in class. I'm always saying to them, get outside. The students are very much, some students report they don't leave the house for a few days just because they just don't. But so I feel the value of that, Bob. So I reached out to Amy Higgins and Mike and Brian, and we're butting our heads together as far as how can we offer something to students. But it came down to, it's so frustrating, to how do we get the kids there safely? I know if I wanted to lead a hike up over at Richmond, above Richmond Pond on the fire tower hike there, could I lead a hike safely? Absolutely. How can I get kids there? And it really frustrates me. And I know the value of that. I know Miss Higgins knows the value of that. We all know the value of athletics. I just stumble over that whole safety, getting kids to and from. I just can't assure that no one's going to get hurt. And that makes me, that just overcomes my decision.
And I really appreciate that everybody has the kids' safety at heart. I mean, I can tell you've all given a lot of thought. I guess where I get a little confused is it sounds like you sanction the idea of club sports and other activities outside the school for the kids. If that's the case, then why can't we offer something equivalent to that? A club sport with all the inherent disadvantages. Transportation has to be provided on their own. Not everybody can partake. The cohorts mix all the same items, but we would do it as the school. And maybe that would give some kids who don't have an affiliation with these clubs or not could participate. And it may give them we may be able to give them a little bit of help through, gear and things like that they can't get if they're a club player.
Mike hinted to something that's really important as their athletic director, just dealing with concussions. Depending on the situation in the game or whatever, students will not report. They'll not report. They'll come to school when they're dealing with an injury. It's no different if they feel like they have a cold or a fever or a cough. They want to play. They don't want to ruin it for their friends. So that's a real concern as far as students involved in something outside of the classroom are students reporting accurately. It comes down to peer pressure, and it's humongous. That's not something that's talked about across. I don't think it's talked about enough, but it puts a tremendous amount of peer pressure on kids and families as far as participating when in fact they might be sick. It really is. It's something that's not talked about, but it's definitely real. So I ultimately, of course, it's your call as a school committee. I'll lead the activities the best I can. The activities, getting kids to and from, yeah, we're going to have to be real creative. But ultimately, it's your call. And it's tough, no question.
Okay.
Jim Harwood is asked to speak. Jim, you're on.
Okay, thank you for the opportunity to speak, and thanks to everybody for putting in the effort and thought behind these issues. And to me, we're talking now only about sports, which I think is as important as it is a second priority to school. But just within the realm of how to solve the sport problem, I don't hear anybody considering a practice-only model. And the practice-only model, I think, offers several benefits because it eliminates the whole issue of transportation to and from games, but it also eliminates the mixing around the county and outside the county as a potential source of spread. And then when I hear the problems raised as insurmountable for we can't get people to and from, I can really only speak to the cross-country team, which is the one that I know personally. Cross-country requires a lot of gear, and somehow equitably, the cross-country team has been very able through, teamwork and generosity to make sure anybody who wants to ski on that team can ski on that team. And so I'm curious, when we talk about how people can't get to a practice, I assume the coaches have surveyed to see how many people those are and that there is no solution that's available through community resources. Because to me, it just sounds like someone's throwing up a problem and not looking for a solution. Thank you.
Okay, I'm gonna see does somebody want to make a motion of one sort or another?
Yeah, I'm happy to make a motion, Bob. I'd like to make a motion that we, Lenox Public Schools allows the ski season to be held in whatever fashion. All right, give me a minute to think of a motion.
Okay. Does anybody else want to talk about the sports? Molly?
I do, Bob. I guess my concern is, I'm trying to look back at the notes. I just don't see how we can, approve something like the sports when we don't have, I feel like our academics and preserving the, I don't see how we as a school district can approve the athletics when they pose a potential risk. And I think we have to stay focused on our academics. I think that it is very important if students need outlets, that they are directed to community outlets that might be there, the community center. There is a Nordic club. There probably, I don't know about Alpine. I don't think that it's the role of the public schools. I don't know that I buy into like we should be offering what Bob Munch was saying, which is like, let's try to offer what we can. I don't want to see us as a school district take that on, but I would support the guidance counselors trying to make sure that students can get connected to whatever outlets might be helpful to them. But I don't know, unfortunately, in this pandemic, that that's our role as a public school to take that on.
Anybody else wish to speak? Well, it may be that we don't even need a motion, Bob. The consensus seems to be that we shouldn't perhaps be doing. I mean, I don't know if this is the consensus. So if you want to come up with a motion, by all means, come up with it. You're muted. You're muted.
Okay, yeah, I'll make the motion one more time. I would like to introduce a motion to reopen the Lenox Public Schools ski seasons in a limited, whatever limited fashion is necessary in this COVID time.
Is there a second?
Oh, I will second.
And would you be thinking, Bob, that might be similar to what Mr. Harwood suggested, that it might be a practice only kind of thing, or?
I would be amenable to almost anything that gets the kids outside getting exercise.
Christine?
I think I agree with that. I mean, I think that was a solution that I hadn't heard before. I myself hadn't considered it. I think it would be a good step. And I also agree that I think we should just consider whatever we can. I mean, I'm really supportive of the kids doing as much as they can. And it seems like there are a couple points where we're pretty stuck, but maybe if we just think a little more on those couple of points and think of some creative solutions, we can get something.
Anybody else want to weigh in?
Mr. Vaughn, it looked like Tom and Diane Romeo had a comment they wanted to make.
Hang on a sec here. Oh, I got to find them on my list here. If they raise their hand, it goes right to the top.
While you're looking, can I add in something, or is it not the time?
No, go ahead.
No, so to speak to Mr. Harwood's comment, I completely understand. I was a young man that grew up in Blandford, and then basically the rule was in my family is if I didn't have a friend playing a sport, I didn't play. Hence, 6'2" Dave Pugh as a sophomore didn't play basketball. I would have loved to play basketball, but my mother from the very beginning said, "You're not playing basketball because you don't have a ride." So that speaks a lot to me when you say. So when I have students sign up for on Family ID to play cross-country skiing or alpine, there's not going to be a student there who's going to apply to be on that team whose parents can't get them there, period. So students can get, so I think the conversation with our families is one of peer pressure, again, where a parent may be forced to say, okay, we'll figure it out. And in fact, they can't. Or they make the tough calls as a family and say, we can't because we can't get you there. Right there at that moment is where I have difficulty. The students who can, whereas we have a strong school normally because we have clubs and we have activities and we have an extremely involved, high quality staff that are connected to our kids. And it happens because our kids are there till 2:30 and they go off to their clubs. And we see tremendous success based on the clubs we have at our school. Tremendous. Now it all comes down to relationships formed. With COVID, with cohorts, I understand what everybody's saying, but we're asking families to make that hard choice. And there's families that are not going to be able to participate. There's kids who are not going to sign up on Family ID because they can't get there. So it's the equity piece. I understand if you can get there, it's something for somebody, but there's a kid out there, at least there's a half a dozen kids who wish they could be, and they can't based on their situation. And I can't, that's hard for me to live with. But if needed from this committee, I will do my best and due diligence to satisfy what you would like.
Thank you. So I have got Tom and Diane Romeo. Go ahead, Tom or Diane.
So yeah, it's Tom Romeo. I just wanted to make a couple quick comments. One is most of you know, we've followed Nordic skiing for years and years and years. And whether it be right or wrong, kids for years and years and years have been responsible for getting themselves to wherever they're going on their own for years and years and years, with the exception of races themselves. So for practices, the expectation that they won't be able to get there, they've been doing that. They've been doing that for years. The second part is if someone is not feeling well, or if someone's not being injured, if you've watched many cross-country races, someone who's not feeling well will not participate. There's just no way physically they could do a 5 or 7K race if they're not feeling well. And they're probably, it's amazing how quick they'll pull themselves out of the line, so that other kids could do that. So in terms of that piece of it, I don't think that would ever happen with a Nordic race. So again, I just think it's incredibly important for kids to get outside, to get out in the woods, get out training, and they just need to be outside. And to take the skiing programs, whether it be Nordic or Alpine, away, it's so different than the other sports. Yes, it's a shame people can't play basketball, but these sports are outside, and I think they're very safe. So that's all I wanted to say.
Thank you. And we have Robert Alderson would like to speak.
Hi. Yeah, I just want to add to what Mr. Romeo said there too. I mean, Alpine and cross country are outside. Alpine even more so with being socially distanced. As Molly knows, and so does Bob Munch, we ran a very successful soccer program over the fall and nobody got COVID. We managed it perfectly. So I think it's a little disingenuous to say, there's too much risk. We've already proved we can manage and mitigate that risk to the point where we have no cases. The equity piece may be a little more difficult, but from the Alpine standpoint, I know the school has never provided transport, so there's no issue there. The kids will go to the Alpine venues by themselves as they always have. So it's a little, unfortunate where we're trying to say, because a minority of people cannot get to an event, everybody else should not be able to participate either. If this was an issue, it should have been an issue over many, many years. To throw it in now as factor of COVID is a little disingenuous, I believe.
Okay, and the last comment will be from Jim Harwood again.
That seems to be a technical difficulty. I spoke my mind.
Okay, thank you.
I guess I can share more of my thoughts. I think my concern is that approving, I think the way that students have gotten to these events in the past is by carpooling. I know in my family's experience, I worked very hard with a large team of parents for the middle schoolers and 9th graders and 10th graders to get them there. That was my own personal family's experience for Nordic for 4 years. I imagine for Alpine, the majority of students also might need to carpool. So I don't see how, as a school committee member, I can say, oh yeah, let's have this sport when I know full well that the school district, I can't back up carpooling. And that is, even though it's not that students got themselves to the events, my parents and carpools worked very hard to get students to the event. And unfortunately, because of the nature of this virus, carpools are not available. If they are available, it's to smaller groups that have made a choice to limit who they're carpooling with. And I don't feel comfortable as a school committee member saying, yes, let's have this sport, knowing that there's only a small number of students that can drive themselves. It's really families. And I do think there is an equity issue.
Okay, we need to bring this.
One more comment, Bob, is just, I mean, it sounds good that kids have transportation, but I can tell you, and Brian can tell you, and Dave Pugh can tell you, we wait at the building for someone to be picked up all the time. And, you know, that we're fortunate that Brian Cogswell is out there when the buses leave and kids are waiting for rides to make sure that social distancing is occurring. Are we going to put that pressure on our coaches? And I know in the past, our coaches would take that last student and say, come on in my car and I'll take you home. I mean, that is part of my decision. If you really look at the overall picture, it is problematic of the responsibility we're putting on a coach that is getting a $2,000 stipend. You know, we have everyone in the building accounted for every day. We're going to ask our coaches to turn in a list every day, like we do with attendance, of who attended and who didn't. You know, they're going to check their email 30 minutes before practice begins to know who might have been sidelined by the nurse during the school day. I mean, there's a lot of complexity behind this that I think people don't understand. It seems like we just send kids outside and they do what they're doing. If they're doing it under Lenox's name, I feel that we are responsible to uphold the rules that we uphold every day. I have met parents in the parking lot of quarantined children that wanted their kids to attend hybrid classes. I have done that. I don't expect Greg Knight to go out to Bosque Mountain and say, no, you can't practice tonight. You know, who's he going to call? Whose phone is he going to use? How's he going to find the numbers? Those are questions that I ask myself when I think about how this can run. I do not want to be out there as an administrator organizing this. I just don't see it. Life is complicated enough.
Okay, let's bring this to a vote now. So the motion, Bob, was to resume athletics for the ski seasons, for the ski teams, in whatever fashion is deemed appropriate by the administration and athletic director. Something along those lines. Was that it, Bob?
Yeah, that's pretty much it.
Okay, I'm going to call for a roll call vote. David Rimler? Unmute yourself, by the way.
That was an aye.
Okay. Molly?
Molly Elliott.
I'm sorry, that was Nay? Yep. Christine?
Christine Morrow, aye.
Francie?
Francie Sorrentino, nay.
Bob Munch?
Bob Munch, aye.
So that's, and myself, aye. So that's 4-2. Is that correct? Okay, so we'll move on.
Chairman, the
Update
last
on,
item
antici-
under the superintendent's report has to do with the anticipated resumption of in-person instruction on January 19th. As you, Mr. Chairman, had mentioned before, you and I had a meeting last week with, I'll call it an ad hoc group of medical specialists and people who are engaged in public health matters in Berkshire County. And like you, I found it a very interesting discussion. And the upshot of the discussion, there were two of them. One of them was that the discussions should continue throughout the year on some basis, as long as the virus is among us. And the other was that it seemed that because we have a joint labor management commission that represents both the administrative and the LEA's positions in the district, that it would be advantageous to invite the president of the LEA and such other members of the LEA, I mean, a reasonable number that she thought would benefit from participating in that discussion before the opening of school, which we continue to expect to be occurring on the 19th of January. And so we will have a meeting. There's already a memo out for the people who would be involved in the meeting, and among them would be Joint Labor Management Committee people. And we plan to meet with those medical specialists and public health officials either at the end of this week or the beginning of next week. At today's Joint Labor Management Committee meeting, it was generally felt that, with the exception of the town of Lee, which is seeing a spike in cases of COVID-19, or at least of positive tests, the trend in Lenox and other communities in this area, particularly Pittsfield, because we have so many students from Pittsfield coming into the district, the trend is at this time of a decline in the cases. And so there was no action taken except to recognize that the circumstances, with the exception of Lee, continued to be favorable for the reopening of school. So unless something happens, we will resume instruction on the 19th of January, but we will also have a Joint Labor Management Committee meeting following that meeting with the medical professionals in order to make a determination about what to recommend to the school committee. I would suggest that, because when I came forward and proposed to the school committee that it close the schools to in-person instruction in anticipation of what were considered to be, I thought, dire predictions of what would happen during the holidays, Thanksgiving, Christmas, and New Year's. The date that was specified by the committee that we would be closed for in-person instruction was from the 30th of November through the weekend of the Martin Luther King holiday, with school resuming on the 19th. And so it would seem to me, Mr. Chairman, that unless the school committee deems it necessary to continue to keep the schools closed based on information we would certainly provide to the committee in advance of that date, we will go forward with the assumption that schools will reopen then. As I said, if any kind of medical issue arises that puts that into question, I would advise the school committee of it, and the school committee might want to schedule a special meeting to deal with that. But otherwise, I see us moving forward to reopening school on the 19th.
Yeah, and I would concur that the feeling I had from the meeting, and obviously this is a week by week decision, was that it certainly is likely that we should be reopening on the 19th, and that it would be a very unusual circumstance that would have us close. Again, looking at the very specific metrics of, and by inviting Jim Willis to be part of each meeting, and Jim is involved with the tracking and knowledge of who has the virus and whatever, that we would know very clearly what the issues were, if there were any issues, and it certainly seemed more likely that we would be open more often than not from here on through, barring something really dramatic happening. So I don't think we need to make any action on this, do we, Bill?
No, I'm providing this to the committee for its information. If the committee wants to take action on it, then, by all means, don't let me stop you. But I'm basically telling you that I'm taking the 19th as a commitment to reopen, barring unforeseen and serious circumstances that would lead to revisiting that decision.
And Bill, that would be a return to hybrid.
That's correct.
Okay, so let's move on then to, I think, what many people are here for, which was the update on the lower grades reopening task force. I anticipated that we would have, a large number of people here for that, and that they might wish to speak. And maybe when they hear the report, they won't feel they need to. We had a meeting this afternoon at 5 o'clock, and we were developing a motion for consideration for tonight's meeting. And we were wrestling, and it was prepared by, Orrin Cass, who ran it by me, who ran it by Brenda Kelly, who ran it by Bill, Superintendent Cameron, for editing and whatever. But it was intended to be a discussion point for developing a proposal to come to the committee tonight, with the anticipation that possibly we would be reopening kindergarten and first grade for full day instruction. We decided that right off the bat that a more appropriate date might be either February 1st or February 22nd in terms of reopening. January 19th was way too soon to be considering that, given all that has to happen. We decided to keep it at kindergarten and first grade and not include second, at least until we know more. There's a lot more that we would need to know about staffing and cost and so on moving forward. The third part of it was the separation of remote and in-person learners. And Dr. Cameron had sent out during just the beginning of the break a survey that asked people to make a decision between remote and in-person instruction. And there were a number of people hadn't responded as of the 3rd, which was the date for it. There were 54 people who hadn't responded. Subsequently, that number, 13, 18, was cut in half approximately, but there was still a number of people who didn't respond. And so we had a lot of feedback from parents who, because one of the main points of the motion for consideration was that if there were classes with more than 12 students, there'd need to be some reassigning of students, as well as the remote students would have a separate instructor. It might be an instructor for kindergarten and grade 1, a combined grade. I mean, those are all things that were subject to negotiation, but they were and we had received a lot of feedback from parents that they were, well, first off, they were disappointed in some regards that they didn't have the option to select stay with hybrid instruction. But there were a lot of parents who were very concerned about the idea of their student after 4 months switching teachers. And so at that point we had a discussion, about that aspect of the issue. And, I expressed that in my 33 years as a principal in various places, some only had one grade per, class, but in the 25 years in Lenox, that I probably only moved sometimes at parent request after much thought, sometimes because of some untenable situation in the classroom. Maybe we moved 4 or 5 kids in 25 years. It's not something you do lightly. And to take probably 25% of our kindergartners and first graders, somewhere between 25 and 33%, roughly speaking, just based on the numbers that I've seen, that would have to move classes. It just didn't square. with what I thought we ought to be doing. And so to that end, the committee said, okay, well, what could we do that might make this tenable? And I said, you know, when I went into this, I was thinking if the numbers were such that you could have an in-class of 12 or fewer, and a number of students opted for remote, that we could maybe make that work, but nobody would lose their students. So we're going to meet again next week, on the Thursday next week, to explore where we go from here. But at this point, we decided that it was not really feasible to continue with the idea of opening full-time with grades kindergarten and first grade, with the numbers of students who would have to be reassigned to a different teacher. And we're going to look at other options next week. This was definitely a split decision. We didn't actually vote on it because it was clear that the vote would, the vote for a proposal to come forward to the school committee tonight was not going to get the support, largely because of that kids switching classes. We also felt that we needed to have a much greater buy-in from the Morris teaching faculty about the whole process. And so we felt that we needed to build buy-in, and we needed to figure out a way to not have kids switching classes after 4 months. That if this were July or August and we were talking about it, we could probably make something work. But after 4 months of instruction with the teachers, it just didn't seem like a feasible thing. So that's where we are. I don't know if Oren wants to add anything to that.
Mr. Chairman, I have a question.
Yeah.
What's the dealing with pre-K? Are they going back to January 19th? Do they go back full day? Well, what about our pre-K?
Well, I don't believe anything was going to change with pre-K.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, if I could speak to that, I don't know why there's a question about that. They will, as everybody else, resume the schedule that existed prior to the 30th of, well, prior to the Thanksgiving break.
Perfect.
On the 19th.
Yeah, that wasn't really part of our discussions, Fran. We were really looking.
I realize that, but you have 3 parents asking.
Okay, yep. So, I don't know, I asked if Oren wanted to speak, and he hasn't raised his hand, so maybe he doesn't want to speak. Okay, so moving on to subcommittees. Human Resources is continuing to work on the hiring of a new superintendent. The Finance Subcommittee had a meeting, I believe it was before our last school committee meeting. And we met with a couple of members of the Finance, the Town Finance Committee. And we're working toward developing, and I mentioned this, I think last time, three different budgets. Obviously, we aren't actively doing it. Melissa and Bill are doing that, and the principals. But we will, be sharing some information that the Finance Committee would like us to share fairly soon to share with them as they look at the overall budget for the town. And we'll do that. And I don't believe that any of the other subcommittees, the Strategic Planning Subcommittee, by the way, is meeting on Thursday this week with an idea of finalizing the draft of the strategic plan to actually bring to the committee later this month. We're very close. We've got, I believe, I'd have to think about it. I believe we have 8 strategies that we're working on. We'll try to streamline the presentation that we make to the committee, but we hope to have something to you perhaps as early as the end of, well, sometime maybe next week, that we'll just send a copy out to committee members so they can read the full thing, but the presentation we make at the school committee meeting will be somewhat later. So we have Kristen Moriarty's raised her hand.
Yeah,
So-
there's their hand raised.
Is that? Kristen's using an older version of Zoom. You need to promote Kristen to a panelist. Okay, Kristen,
Now I know I need to update. Thank you.
no,
My
I think it it might have been us. We never
comment
know.
was on reopening into full-time. And I just want to acknowledge the task force meeting for hearing the teachers tonight, for really listening to them. I encourage you to continue doing so as you meet next week and move forward. And I also would like to bring into the fold again the conversation about equity. I heard your athletic director bring it up and some of your coaches bring it up. It seems like it's getting glossed over in a lot of the conversations. At least that's what I'm hearing. That's my judgment. And I think that it's really, really important that the school committee finds out who the most vulnerable children are and what their needs are as you talk about bringing kids back into full day. And I say that as a parent who does not have a child who is considered in the most vulnerable population. But I think that they really need to be centered in the discussion about bringing kids back into full-time learning. I do have young children and I do know the value that they would have in coming back to fully in-person learning. I'm on board for that if the teachers are on board for that and if it can be done safely and logistically. Thank you.
Thank you.
So when do athletics start, Mr. Chairman? Do they start immediately or do we go wait till January 19th or?
I think we need to allow the athletic director and principal to figure out. I mean, my way of thinking, would be they wouldn't start till school starts again. That would be my thinking, but we'll let Mike and Brian and David, figure that out, and whether it's just the practices, and how they support maybe the clubs that have already formed around these sports. But anything else for the good of the order?
Bob, I just have one, just one question or comment. I hear the term, our most vulnerable students, and it's been identified by age, grade. It's been identified by IEPs, perhaps 504s, ELLs. I get a little kind of, what's the right word? Not confused, but I hear it thrown around, but our vulnerable students can also be, aside from those, also ones who have economic pressures on them, and so I almost wonder if it wouldn't be helpful to sort of take a look at really who are our most vulnerable students across our entire, all of our grades. I don't know, I hear the word bandied about and almost too loosely and I just hope no one is being lost in the shuffle.
That's interesting that you mentioned that. There's the state actually has a part of the whole platform they have with the student information that they gather, both academic and demographic and whatever, is a thing called EWIS, which is an early warning indicator system. It's all based on information. It's probably better as you develop more information on a student, maybe like 4th, 5th, 6th grade on up. I don't know how actively it's used in the district, but it's a tool. It's not the only tool but it does take into account the information that's been entered into the SIMS student information management system So it would have low income information in it as best it's been reported. Obviously, that's not always well reported. But it does, and then it looks at, how students have done on the state testing and so on, which of course didn't take place last year. And I'm not sure what other factors, but there are a number of factors it looks at, but that's just one data source. But I think you're absolutely right. I mean, in the era of COVID, we say, okay, well, these are our most vulnerable students, are our younger students. But there also are special needs students at all grade levels. There also are there are English learners. There are a lot of people who could fit under that. And I think that's something that the strategic planning group, is aware of and has been trying to figure out how to address in the document we're putting together. Not necessarily every group that we've just mentioned, but trying to look at it. So we will definitely be interested in the reactions of other school committee members to the strategic plan when we roll it out, because it's still going to be a draft form for comments and re-editing by the committee. So.
Thank you.
Molly? Oh, you weren't raising your hand. Okay, I think we're at that point where maybe somebody makes a motion to adjourn.
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
Molly Elliott,
Francie Sorrentino, second the motion to adjourn.
roll call vote. Molly,
Molly Elliott, aye.
Christine,
Christine Morrow, aye.
David,
Aye.
Francie,
Francie Sorrentino, aye.
Bob Munch.
Happy New Year to everybody, and aye.
Yeah, and before I say aye, I just want to thank everybody for all the great work from the past year. And I know our deliberations are thoughtful. We consider all kinds of stuff. And we don't always make a decision that's popular with everybody, but we're here serving the public as best we can. And we collect our paychecks. When do we get those paychecks? Anyway, I vote to adjourn also. Thank you, everybody.